Anyway, yes indeed, good to see everybody here. Hope my sound is okay. I'm just a little bit concerned about that. In fact, I'm almost tempted to switch. Can someone in the comments just quickly confirm about the sound, and if it's all good I will kick off. Quentin Rankin, good to see you. Sound is okay. Well, if sound is okay, then sound is okay, so I am going to start in that case. You get all thumbs up? Oh, nobody asked you. So let's kick off. This is Tokyo Tonight. My name is Hiko Simon. Good to see you all. Good to see everybody. And got a bunch of topics, but not too many, because tonight I do want to bring back the disco to the show. That's a goal for tonight. So I'm going to do the main topics I want to do first. I'm going to leave the smaller news topics till later. We'll get through as fast as we can. And yes indeed, who have we got here in the comments? Let's say hello to everybody. We've got Bold Berlitz Boy, who got in here early and got a seat, so congratulations on that. We've got Steve from Berkeley. Right, or Japanese Library, good to see you. Busy editing a video, so indeed I hope you will be awake as well. Or hope that you are awake. Sergeant Booker, good to see you. James Kelly, good to see you. We got Dan H, King and Kodos, Quentin Rankid, Lauren Sakai, glad that you made it. Dan H, glad that you made it, and glad that you liked everybody's here. As you can see, I changed the settings at the top of the video. It wasn't working so well. Hey, the J-Vlog, good to see you. As you can see, the subscription account thing wasn't really working, and I just figured I'd just put on a reminder that if you like the show, please like. And yes, for those people watching who always wonder when the show is on, it's on every Sunday at 22:30 JST. And good to see you all. So not a big news week, which is good news. It means that hopefully we will be able to get to some music at the end. One other quick thing I just want to check before we start. Oh, that's not capturing. Oh, I'll be able to get the sound in any case, even if I can't get the cork to show up, which would be disappointing, but that is what it is. So in any case, let's get into it with the topics. So first thing is MyChan TV news. As you can see from the screen cap here, I've been testing out a feature which will be available to basically the people who chip in to help support development on the site. Pro users, we're setting up the pro user functionality, and the first function that's going to become available. It's a little bit lots of lines there from photographing the screen, but it's this thing, and it's working kind of well. A few bugs which I'm trying to work out, but it's this idea that when you want to catch up with your subscriptions, I always get stuck when sometimes I want to catch up with lots of videos in my bundle, and you know, it's always nice when you can prioritize shorter videos, and sometimes you want to watch longer, like laundry videos, like if you're in a car or something like that, and you don't mind listening to something longer. So I've set up this feature which will be able to control how long the duration of the videos that you capture for the autoplay on the video, which is a great way to catch up with your subscriptions. It's almost there. At the moment it is, when I say like capture between 1 and 5 minutes, it's also capturing videos. It works for the 1 to 5 minutes, but it also captures videos like 1 hour and so on. It's not quite differentiating the time codes properly, so just figuring out the bugs on that, and that will be a super cool feature. So we'll have that ready, and a bunch of other features for whoever wants to request them for MyChan TV, so that'll be pretty awesome. Yeah, the other thing is that there was actually a question that someone, Ninjaru88, left on the video after the show was recorded last week, which he or she put on the video and then took it away, but it was actually a legit question, and it's something which I also want to look at what I can do about this. There's a question where why can't they just select all to add all 600 subscriptions that they have to one playlist and just be able to autoplay the whole playlist? The fact is that what do you call it? The API for YouTube only allows. We've tested this out. It only works up to like 300 channels at a time. Plus, it also gets super slow trying to process and add everything. Like you have to actually wait like 5 or 6 minutes. And in that time your browser will freeze up. If you're patient enough and you know that and you know to wait, it's okay. But because of this, we've actually, we couldn't just make it for people who have like 2,000 channels. We just couldn't make it so that you could add all 2,000 at once. You get errors. It'll seem like it's frozen or broken. However, that said, it's kind of understandable that you would want to do this. So two ways around this I can think. Well, one, the workaround that we've done for now is that it will actually show a select all button if you do a filter for anything. Just put in like YouTube or channel or something like that, And if the search result has less than 300 channels, it will allow you to select up to 300 channels at once. So try a filter. The other idea, which I must admit I have, which might be a nice pro feature, is although it's really difficult to actually do like a select all and add all to a playlist like manually, or to add one by one manually, I could add a pro feature if people are interested, for example, in having just the MyChan TV create a bundle for all your channels in the background, just so that it's there whenever you log in, rather than have to go and create it. That might be a nice way around this as well, given that it's understandable that people would want this. Yeah, those are some feedback and latest news on MyChan TV. I don't think there's any particular YouTube news this week, other than, of course, the Creator Studio beta. There's like 5 new features coming to it. It's gradually catching up to the functionality of the classic Creator Studio, and of course YouTube isn't adding any new features to the Creator Studio. They're trying to put everything into beta, even though it does not yet properly cross both, cover all the features that are on the classic YouTube settings. However, that should come out pretty soon. So anyway, that's what's going on with YouTube and with MyChan TV. Please be sure to check it out, MyChan TV. Boom, boom. Now for the other topics for Tokyo Tonight this week. By the way, don't forget, believe in yourself. Interesting comment there. Perhaps when the API was written, a person wouldn't have ever conceived that there would be 300 YouTube videos. Or it's not even videos, by the way, that they would have wanted in a playlist. This is channels. So these are all the channels and subscription feeds which would go into a bundle through which you ought to create a playlist. But yes, even 300 subscriptions, probably back in the day when they created the API, probably it was pretty unthinkable to have even more than 300 subscriptions. So absolutely right about that. Now this is worth mentioning. So of course last week, thanks for all the people who watched and supported Japan Business Time. It was actually a really good video. For those of you who missed it, it was about when you work in Japan, what to do about dress code, and that also went into the broader discussion about things like having blue hair, nose rings, tattoos. To be clear, I work in a place where there are nose rings and blue hair and tattoos, so it's possible to do, but of course there's a spectrum, and there's things like, well, what about showing up for a job interview, and you know, what is the degree of tolerance, and of course, like everywhere, it varies. But you know, it's Rochelle's job to go into different workplaces and to see how Japanese react when working in America, and how Americans do working in Japan, and how to adjust to the expectations, and to prepare for, you know, the kind of situations that she sees, which is when it typically doesn't go well. We had a really, really good discussion, so please check out Japan Business Time After Hours edition, where we talked about that. Coming up this week is a really, really good topic. It's us talking about changing jobs in Japan, which can be a pretty sensitive topic as well, given that a lot of companies sort of the mentality. I worked in a company where it was very unusual for people to quit, for example, and it can be a really awkward discussion, not least of which the fact that most Japanese people still don't understand that they are free to quit their jobs. Like there are so many cases in the news where people have like said that they want to quit, and their bosses have said no, and they've believed that they needed permission to quit. So yeah, it's another great topic, and we will be doing that this week. So yes, go and check that out this week on Wednesday, 10:30 p.m, same time as this show, but on Wednesday Japan time. So yeah, Kang and Kodos, the privacy contract with Deloitte, super deep. You can't talk about stuff even after I quit working for Deloitte. Kang and Kodos, well, I used to work for Deloitte 20 years ago, but yeah, well, the other thing about these sort of things, hey Channel Ralph, good to see you. The other thing about these things is that quite often those contracts are drafted to be scarier, you know, often not always enforceable. But that said, you don't obviously you don't want to test things out, and that's another common sense thing. You know, you don't. It's not a good idea to test the limits of your relationship, especially, you know, with an employer. And even if you've quit, frankly, it's not a good idea to look like the sort of person who's going to, you know, set the place on fire on the way up. But sure, you know, there's more and more demanding agreements, not just with things like confidentiality, but also things like non-competes and so on, and those are coming into Japan now as well. So certainly interesting. It'll be a great topic. So please certainly check out Japan Business Time. And at the end of the show, I always put on the end titles, the playlist from the previous seasons as well as from this season. So it's a great thing to catch up. Really, it's not really time framed, the content, so you can pretty much watch it. And it's, I think, the best content on my channel, so please go and check that out. That is awesome. Speaking of awesome, check out Ozzy from Ozzy Awesome, the YouTuber. he went and actually he did the thing which a lot of people did a few years ago, and which I've kind of toyed around with and not really made much progress on, the idea of writing a book. So he's written a book, S.A. Osborne, Swipe Right for Love, and yeah, he put it up on self-published, put it on Amazon, and I went and downloaded it. There's a bit of football on there at the bottom there, maybe, in fact you don't need to see that, but yes, it's pretty good. It just arrived the other day. Where is it? It's down here. And I do plan to read it. So it's not too big. It looks pretty readable. It's how many pages have we got here? Now that's interesting. That is the first book I've ever seen, if you can make that out, that doesn't have page numbers on it. I guess you just use a bookmark on it or something like that. It looks like a dating diary anyway, and you know, Ozzy Awesome is a funny guy, so I am looking forward to finding out what he's done in there, and I will report to you all whether it's good or whether it's terrible, and you should all unsubscribe him for it being such a terrible novel, which I know it won't be. But I actually got a good reminder. This reminds me that during this week, another person who did this, who I became a fan of. I mean, I do generally, if I see someone who I consider to be in the broader community who puts out a book, I will go and support it. I'll go out and read it, at least with the intent of reading a few chapters and trying to, you know, there's a few books I must admit I haven't gotten through, but there are some books which have surprised me and I've gotten through and have been among the best things I've ever read. And one of those things, of course, was Hello, My Name is Yoko and I'm a Racist, which is just one of the most awesome books I've ever read, by Baye McNeil. And yeah, I went and wrote a kind of a review blog afterwards, just giving my thoughts on what an awesome book this was. And yeah, it kicked off actually. I was kind of familiar with the guy before that, but I'm not sure I'd met him before then. I got the chance to meet him a couple of times afterwards. But he wrote a Facebook post this week about the experience of putting that book out, and about the sort of positive reaction around the community to the book, and how that sort of set him off on his you know, continued now becoming more of an author and more of a writer, which he absolutely should be. He's a very gifted writer. And I remember I got a notice on Facebook saying that I'd been tagged in a post, and when I saw this thing and it was talking about this time in his life about releasing this this book, and the sort of feedback he got about it, I was, oh, that was nice of him to think of me, you know, to tag me in the post. And I was reading through the post, and it was talking, he was sort of telling the story about a conversation about, you know, influencers, and how what really made a difference was these sort of, you know, super influencers who sort of changed the perceptions of the book. And he put on, I was scrolling down the post, and at one point he said, no, there was one person. I was like, geez, who was that? I mean, there were a lot of people I know, but who was it? I went down and he said, he mentioned my name, and I'm like, okay, well, me and who? Scrolling down some more, expecting to be on like a list of names. And he wrote this long, really, really nice, in fact, kind of over the top for me kind of post, describing me as an influencer, which I know I am not. But I wrote what I felt about the book, which was that I thought it was awesome, and I still think that it's awesome. And he wrote this very, very nice post, and this is years after the event, just saying what a big difference he felt it made. And hey, look, I'm a big fan of the guy, and you know, there's no thanking me, I'm thanking him. But he wrote a very, very nice post about that, and it's nice for me to think as well that yeah, my 2 cents can have a positive impact like that. Mr. Quarterchip, an influencer indeed. So I guess I can't really recall ever having been described as an influencer in any capacity, let alone like an important influencer by anyone ever before. I thought it was kind of cool, except then last night I watched the Fire Festival documentary on Netflix. And you know, I think what we learned from that documentary is that when it hits the fan, you know, the influencers are the first ones to catch it. I don't know, possibly I have like an abandoned refugee tent on a Bahamas island somewhere, perhaps. I don't know what this entitles me to, but yes, so that was pretty cool. I don't know if I will have the chance to do the same thing for Ozzy Awesome, but I have the book and I do plan to read, and it looks pretty good. So thank you for that, Ozzy, and everyone, if you're interested in supporting other creators, including this guy, is actually quite a good, funny creator. who's resident in Tokyo as well, go get the book on Amazon. In fact, I will try to remember to put a link below in the video comments for later on. Good to see Andrea, my boy, by the way. How's the butter at my place? We still have a butter supply, but every day it's just taking it one day at a time. That's pretty much how it is with butter. So I figure we'll get to the big topics first today, and we've got to talk about this. So this morning, was it this morning? It might have been yesterday morning. I was walking along, going through my RSS feeds, and I saw in Japanese this story come up. And it was one of those things that made me kind of briefly stop in the street and say, oh dear. So the story here is that apparently in Oita, a prefecture on the east side of Kyushu, there was a 50-year-old translator who had somehow all of her life been a translator, who was participating in a supporting an international marathon event, and in Japan it's now pretty common that each company, each high school, each university will have exchange students or employees for these companies. That they will go out and hire Kenyan runners, Ethiopian runners, basically all those sort of famous running nations, particularly from Africa. There are a lot of them, and they're particularly perhaps in places like Kyushu, which do perhaps have a large number of Korean and Chinese, but don't have a lot of visually different foreigners, like Europeans or Africans. She went and supported the interpreting there for all of the athletes for the day, and went home and felt motivated to go and write about her experience. And the way that she described the experience, which I see, bless her heart, she didn't write, by all appearances there was nothing malicious in the way that she intended to write it, but she said that she felt like it was a wonderful day. Her experience translating for the Africans, at first it was like communicating with cavemen. Slowly they came out of their shells, and it was lovely seeing them all walking along together like cute chimpanzees. The good news about this is that even on the right-wing xenophobic Reddit 4chan type internet community in Japan that we have on Nichan, the comments are pretty universally the same as mine, which were, how does a person like this become a translator? I mean, my immediate reaction was, oh my god, this person broke the first rule of Translator Club, which is that you don't talk about racist stuff in Translator Club. How does a person like this even become a translator? And it's funny, when I posted this article and the reaction, credit to Rocket News, as they often do, Sora News 24, which picked this up after it had first come out on Itai News, where I picked it up. They seem to follow a lot of the same threads that I do in Japanese. So they summarized the story, which the woman's identity hasn't come out. The city council who was running the event is still trying to figure out how they're going to apologize for this, apparently. But the internet reactions translated here are pretty much the same as me. Like, how does a person like this even get to be a translator? And is she... I don't really understand, actually. And how someone could think that it's okay to call anybody a caveman or a chimpanzee. So yeah, first rule of being a translator is do not be racist towards the people that you're translating towards. The reactions on the internet when I posted this were also kind of interesting. There was the inevitable people who, of course, the condemnation, for me, the face palming, the oh my god, this person should never be allowed to interact with the outside world ever again and probably needs to find a new profession. But there were some people who pointed out, as is quite often the case, particularly in places like, for example, Australia, where this sorts of thing happens, where a lot of people feel still the urge to read and say, look, I read through this whole thing and I don't think she did this maliciously. I think that she was just misunderstood, but she didn't have ill intent. And I can see that, actually. I can totally see that. I've grown, again, you typically sort of get this in Australia, where in Australia people often express things that to the rest of the world sound pretty terrible. Not quite as terrible as this, but pretty terrible. And I know that people don't often say things with the malintent that it's taken. So this person's saying, I don't think she meant any harm by it, so it's a bit, everyone's being a bit harsh on her. Surely she's going to be so embarrassed by this, she'll learn her lesson. And maybe she will, and maybe that's the good thing if she does learn the lesson. Of course, the thing is, my view on racism is, and it's also, if you talk about, hi, my name is Loco and I'm a racist, the book there, so this is the journey that Baye ignores, it's probably better to be, in my book, a malicious racist than it is to be an ignorant, innocent racist. In the end of the day, when you say a racist thing, it hurts people. It hurts the people who hear it. If these athletes who she translated for found out that she spent the day helping them, thinking of them as subhumans, thinking of them as cavemen and monkeys, and she was a lovely, normal lady, that's going to be incredibly hurtful to those people. And here's the thing. I know bigoted, racist people who are open about being bigoted. And the thing about those people is that although I, of course, can't endorse anything that they think, at least because they're self-aware, I have seen people who I know are racist interact with non-white people and been perfectly good about their behavior. And they'll do one of two things. They'll avoid the situation, or they'll suck it up and keep quiet and not say what they think. It's pretty rare. I don't think I've ever seen, even knowing people who are prejudiced and who've been open to me for some reason. I remember at university and so on, having these conversations with people at times. Even people who are self-aware of their racism, they will control it at least. You know, they'll recognize that it's not worth walking around with a Molotov cocktail for every single conversation. The problem with ignorant people is that they're always walking around with a Molotov cocktail and they don't realize what they're doing, and they're burning down their houses around them. And when someone says, hey, stop burning down their houses, they feel sorry for themselves as victims for being misunderstood. And the problem is that, you know, I mean, yes, maybe they are a victim for being misunderstood, but what's worse is, you know, the harm that you've caused, and you've got a responsibility as an ignorant person that obviously causes some sort of harm to correct that behavior and to become a little bit more self-aware and don't be so stupid. But this is some next level shit, I tell you. I can't even imagine how a 50-year-old translator could describe African people or anybody. You know, I mean, how would she react if this was Quentin Rankard? Are all the racists, you know, white? Well, that's a good question. Looking back, the people that I was thinking about right now, back in time, like when I was in college, were white, and that's what I typically think. What I loved about the book, and I think this is something which, of course, there are different definitions of racist, and some definitions of racist, which include the definition of the societal power relationship, say that you need to be white or you can't not be, you know, you can't be not white and racist, which I don't buy into. I think, of course, you can be prejudiced and racist even if you're not white. Baye himself, it's not a joke what he says on the front. He was raised a black supremacist. He was raised to be prejudiced against white people, and it took him a long time to deprogram himself, and that's what the book talks about, that journey about realizing that people are people. In the case not being so, you could say that Baye himself is like that. And the thing about that is that it requires a degree of self-honesty about your own biases and prejudices to be able to confront this. Nobody walks, it's very few, I would say less than 1 in 100 people, probably less than 1 in 1,000 would ever admit to being prejudiced or bigoted in any way. You know, you have to be a pretty long way gone to do that. But the problem is that a lot of people inadvertently at some point will feel, or, you know, we're designed biologically to stereotype. Our brains want to process information quickly, and, you know, we will subliminally allow ourselves to react and interpret according to the biases that we are exposed to through the media, through our life experiences, and, you know, and that might offer internally some form of legitimacy for racist views that we have, but it doesn't, if we're not denying that we are racist ourselves, or denying that it's possible, oh, I'm not a bad person, you know, I never think racist things, that's what makes us do ignorant, stupid crap like this lady. I mean, again, this is still pretty far gone. This is way beyond the pale, but the point is you have to sort of recognize in yourself when, yeah, wait a minute, I'm reacting like this, is that right? You know, and the more self-aware, the more you can be a little bit woke, you know, the more you can you don't have to be totally full on and self-effacing about it, but yeah, you've got to acknowledge sometimes. I mean, I can give an example. When I was in Europe, I was involved in several incidents involving attempted muggings or people getting pickpocketed from my group when we were traveling in Spain, and it was always from the same group of people. It was from people of North African appearance. When I say North African, Arabic, you know, well dressed. And when that happens to you a few times in a few weeks, and this is the only time in my whole life that this happened, I realized a few weeks later that, you know, when I saw people that looked like that, I would cross the street to avoid them because I didn't want it to happen again. And I realized what had happened. I thought about it later, and I was thinking to myself, on the one hand, yeah, I was totally exercising what I saw as common sense and safety, but at the same time, I was thinking, well, has this made me prejudiced? And I'd like to think it's not. But I think if I wasn't consciously processing that thought, that's where that thought might become. This is totally different, by the way. This is just a stupid person. But I don't think she gets a pass for being ignorant. In fact, I think she actually doesn't. It makes it worse. Being ignorant, being unself-aware, going around doing this is basically like going around with like a flamethrower behind you and not even being aware and getting upset when people tell you to turn off the flamethrower behind you. So I don't care if she's a lovely old lady. I don't care how nice she is. That was stupid. I mean, it was spectacularly stupid. I mean, first rule of Translator Club is that you did not talk racist stuff at Translator Club. How do you expect to get any work translating? How did you even get to be a translator? Being racist and ignorantly racist. It's an incredible story. So I thought you'd enjoy that, and that's the first story for tonight. What else have we got in here? This is another big case that happened this week, actually. So we have already in Japan, a number of municipalities have already, local governments have recognized basically LGBT same-sex marriage between LGBTQ, and in fact now the list goes, they keep adding letters, and honestly I can't keep up, but same-sex marriage basically. Different, I think Shibuya, Minato has just started the process to recognize what they call civil partnerships, which are basically civil registrations that, bearing in mind of course that Japan isn't really particularly religious to begin with, and that marriage is primarily a civil, it's paperwork, it's a procedure in Japan. Both marriage and divorce, they're actually pretty easy to do, and it's just filling out some forms at the city council office. It's the same as getting a permit for throwing out a large sofa, pretty much getting married and getting divorced in Japan, except of course you do need to fill out some extra parameters and consent is required, but the restrictions are actually, well, there are some funny restrictions, but very little basically in Japan. So the idea of adding a form to allow same-sex people to do it is not actually a huge administrative leap, and there are certainly some parts of Japan, Setagaya, Shibuya, coming up soon, Minato Ward in Tokyo, different municipalities have started all over basically to recognize, yeah, why not allow the paperwork. The problem is that under the Japanese constitution and under the Japanese national law, marriage is still specifically defined in terms of male and female, men and women marrying, and there is still the fear that the recognition of rights as being equivalent to marriage rights, which can have a meaning, significance, particularly in cases, for example, like spousal benefits in the case of death, inheritance, when people live together and they intend to live together in a civil union. I mean, it's basically being able to be legally treated as a spouse has all sorts of impacts for for pensions, for retirement, for hey gimmigo, or never too late for a boom. Glad that you could bring it. For things like work benefits, for being able to travel, being able to be treated as a spouse. So yeah, there's basically in a number of prefectures around the country simultaneously, different LGBTQ couples have brought cases in the local district courts, which possibly in the hope that it gets escalated for constitutionality to the Supreme Court to basically get a judicial interpretation which could overturn and create a new interpretation to basically open the gates to this recognition everywhere. So Dan H, thank you for the super chat there, and valid point. Civil partnerships and marriages are two different things and have different legal weights and acceptance. Absolutely, and this is the point. So local municipalities can offer up. They can't change the definition of marriage all on their own, but what they can do is they can they are empowered to recognize different degrees of civil partnerships, and that's what they have been recognizing. But the point being, even for those people who live in Shibuya and Setagaya and who have access to that, as you correctly point out, this is not it's not equivalent. It's it's not enough for people that are looking for equality, marriage equality, and this is the point that the people are making on NHK, is that they're not suing this to seek special rights for themselves. They're seeking this to sue basically for equal rights. And this was actually something which I think now it's been. In fact, how is it going in Australia? I think it's going in New Zealand. It's already recognised, and I left New Zealand before it was before gay marriage was same-sex marriage was recognised. But I remember even in the debate in New Zealand, when I was at law school, I remember talking about this and how it would go, and there was still fundamentally, when people push back against this, the two arguments that you hear, particularly when you hear in Australia, I guess you hear every argument against it. And that's right, Australia just had a referendum and accepted it, and it seems like it was a common sense thing, but when they had the debate, man, when Australia has anything political, I think that the majority voted for it. I think that's right. I think that they're legislating to accept it, but it's always terrible how you have people who feel empowered, particularly in politics, particularly in Australia, to just say things like that 50-year-old lady. It's like they still have debates in Queensland about daylight saving, with people believing that having daylight saving with an extra hour of sunshine is going to fade the curtains and the houses faster. And it's pretty much the same with this. Whenever you hear the debates against gay marriage, it's the idea that marriage is primarily for procreation and to provide stable families. And so this is outside, same-sex marriage, it doesn't apply, to which the counter-argument is, well, plenty of people nowadays are getting married and not having kids, plus plenty of people are not able to have kids. I mean, the same law, if you use it as being for having kids, then does that disqualify infertile people from being allowed to be married? What's the difference? And then of course you get the extreme ridiculous thing saying, well, where does this end? And it's quite simple. It ends with consenting adults. And why shouldn't it? It's a no-brainer debate to me. Religion doesn't factor into it. It is about equality and civil rights. And best of luck to these people. I know that they're getting a lot of support within the legal community in Tokyo, and probably around Japan as well. They filed these cases simultaneously, and frankly there's not a lot, given that you don't have the religious self-righteous opposition to this. Not to say that there's open acceptance of it, I'm just saying that there's there's a self-righteous bigotry against LGBTQ that a lot of people who, again, like that lady, who feel entitled to embrace their ignorance at times because of the religious justification, which I don't think actually exists. Even in religious circles, of course, different churches recognize now and accept gay clergy and gay marriages, including Church of England, for example. But in Japan, that's not even a factor, right? It's just more about conservative sort of social values and so on. But this is. I think this is. It'll be good to see. We know that in Taiwan that they did this recently, and it actually got pushed back. It moved a little bit too fast for the society there. And I think there was a referendum where they actually voted against it, which was surprising, but it shows that in Asia, it's a step forward and a step back, but I think it's progressing forward. But once again, this is an area where Japan is really leading the way, and congratulations and best of luck to people who are challenging the constitutionality of limiting the definition of marriage to being strictly between men and women. And to me, this is a no-brainer. The only risk about this is that I was watching Tokyo on Fire. It's even good as a podcast. The Langley Esquire podcast, talking about Japanese politics, and I was listening to it last night, talking about the Japanese Supreme Court. There is an interesting thing that the Japanese Supreme Court does exist like the American Supreme Court. And it can rule on constitutional matters. The difference is, however, though, that it's not really as strongly independent or as empowered as Supreme Courts in other countries. And it is very common that on important matters like the status of the Japan Self-Defense Forces, and in other matters which might be politically sensitive, the Supreme Court will often explicitly defer to the Diet and say this is something that needs to be legislated. It's not up to judges to make in place of lawmakers. So although they are taking this with the hope that the court will make a ruling which will effectively alter the interpretation of the Constitution, and why not? I mean, if Japan can have a constitution which says that it shall not hold military forces of land, sea and air, and yet have the Japan Self-Defense Forces, why not let same-sex marriage happen? I mean, it's a much smaller gap, obviously. But that said, it's not totally cut and dry that the Supreme Court of Japan, if it gets that far, will have the backbone to go all the way to recognize this. But we'll see. Dan H. again saying, didn't the Japanese Deputy Prime Minister, former Prime Minister and Finance Minister, currently Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso, did he not say it's women's fault for the declining birth rate? That was a gaffe, but yes, he said that. By the way, Dan H., I appreciate the super chats. Of course, you don't have to do it, but of course, if anyone does a super chat, I am using the YouTube revenue towards my Chan TV, so I appreciate that you're helping support that. And yes, indeed, I talked about this last week with that gaffe, and he said that, interesting, Taro Ozzy is a really interesting character actually. He is from a very wealthy Catholic background. He's a Christian. And although he said that, he was basically kind of stumping to a local audience of elderly men and saying, you know, why are they saying it's us who's bad? You know, we're not bad. What about if the young women had been giving birth, we wouldn't be in this pickle now. I don't think he's actually as ignorant as that comes out, but he's got a way of saying the exact wrong thing. And what I give him credit for is that he makes good self-deprecating jokes about it later on, and of course he retracted the comment later on. Hey Tai Nakamura, good to see you. But that's exactly the kind of thing which you're kind of up against, where you've obviously got lawmakers like him who are cognizant of their extremely elderly and conservative constituents that just don't want to see any kind of a change. And certainly you don't want to rely on someone like Taro Ozzy to carry the flag of marriage equality. You know, it's just not going to happen, right? Better to try for the court first. Certainly it's highly probable that this sort of thing is going to happen more in the background in Japan. What I like is that there isn't so much quite the same degree of bigoted, self-righteous opposition to the sort of thing that there is in other countries. But we will see how it progresses, and I will certainly keep up to date. And it'll be really interesting when the district courts, the lowest level courts, first start to rule on this, and to see if we get a momentum around us, that Japan could really be, as it is with many other things, the first Asian country to really be fully extended on this, to be sort of, you know, and in line perhaps with other OECD countries in Europe and Australia and North America. So we'll see, but that's pretty good news. And thanks again. Remember, if you want to get my attention for a comment, of course a super chat. The show will stop. I will talk to you. I will address your comments, of course. The other thing is, of course, you can just add Mark Hiko Simon in the comments, and I will see it because it'll highlight in orange, and I will talk to you about that. Where are we going? Man, I thought I was going to leave lots of time tonight, but we are already 20 minutes to go, and I do want to play some disco tonight. I have a disco commitment, so let's get in. Have you seen this country? If you have, please call this phone number and tell them that it's okay. This is actually, when this came out, a lot of people found it funny that IKEA had a map. It's funny, I say the Japanese pronunciation. In English it's IKEA, but in Japan it's IKEA. They say it the way, and apparently every other country in the world that isn't English, including Sweden, it's IKEA, it's not IKEA. But yes, we do this, and yes, Sergeant Bilko, test successful. This is on there, and this sort of happens, right? They put out a map, and as usual they did a map with, you know, the Greenwich median in the middle of the map, and, you know, New Zealand on one end, because we are the first country to see the light in the world. New Zealand is the fastest country in the world, and on the edge of the map, and as is typical, you know, it's a couple of little islands, and people just sort of, they lose their motivation as they get to the edges of the map, and it's pretty common both in maps, you know, United Nations committees, Olympic events, that they just can't be bothered going any further by the time they get a little bit to the edge of Australia. It is pretty harsh for us when they remember to include Tasmania and they forget New Zealand. But this isn't a new thing. This always happens. It's part of living in, it's part of the reason that we leave New Zealand is, you know, we feel this nagging urge to be in a country that's actually on most of the maps, which New Zealand isn't all the time. It makes us just feel a little bit sad, that's all, but it happens all the time. There's actually a great, you know, Murray from Flight of the Conchords, Reese, what's his last name? Reese something. But anyway, he's a super funny guy, and he actually did I think like a year ago, a series with the Prime Minister looking into a global conspiracy to remove New Zealand from maps, which was actually a perfect setup for this. That was like a year ago, and actually the Prime Minister, who clearly had nothing better to do, actually even joined in on his conspiracy theory video about exactly this thing. Yeah, they leave us off maps. And by the way, most maps in New Zealand, some Japanese people believe that we actually have maps upside down in New Zealand, so that we're at the top of the world, which would be kind of cool, and there are some joke maps like that. That's not, we don't actually go that far trying to put ourselves on top, but what we do is in New Zealand maps, we'll often have New Zealand, the date line in the middle of the map, and like Europe and America on the edges of the map. I don't know if you are, so most of the maps I saw in school were basically a big like ring around the Pacific and all the countries on the edges, and New Zealand in the middle, so we do have that. Flipping it upside down though, it would be technically correct in the sense that the true magnetic North Pole is actually in Antarctica, because the magnets that we have, north points to south, i.e. the North Magnet which always points to, you know, the when you have a magnet, north and south ends of a magnet, and the north end is pointing towards Alaska or whatever, that's actually pointing towards the South Pole. The north end of the magnet is attracted to the opposite pole, so technically all the maps should be flipped upside down and New Zealand should be the highest country in the world. Well, I think Argentina and Chile get a little bit higher than us, but in any case it doesn't matter because they don't put us on the maps anyway, so there you go. That was funny and depressing and reminds me why I left. New Zealand is real. No, it's not, don't worry. Day and age. What else have we got here? Some other kind of good news, which as a New Zealander I sort of recognise, and I've talked about this before. The bill before Parliament is getting cabinet endorsement to recognise Ainu as Indigenous people to Japan, people predating the current Yamato Japanese people, which has always been a little bit of, again, it's not like most people in Japan have no idea about Ainu or Okinawan or about ethnic minorities within Japan, and you know the number of people that have an awareness of the Shinto sort of religion. I've read books talking about Japanese society, and people who talk about the right-wingers don't want to acknowledge that other people existed in Japan because that would contradict the origin myths of Japan about Yamato being like the original people of Japan and so on. But the number of people that take that seriously in Japanese society, I mean, this is like the number of people in England that believe in the King Arthur legend. It's like 0.0 something%, but they'll go talk to a foreign journalist and make them think that they're what everyone thinks. Nobody thinks about this at all. That's the problem. But of course, the lack of thought being given to it has been, you know, terrible for Japan. And frankly, I've been up there. It's fascinating. I mean, it's really cool that you have these people that have a lot of similarities with Native Americans, a lot of similarities with Inuit people, a lot of similarities I can see with like a Maori and Polynesian culture actually as well. You know, their wooden totems, the sort of food, the sort of practices, the food, you know, the clothes and everything. And if you go to East Hokkaido or Northern Hokkaido, I've been to Akanko, you can go and visit these places, which are still, they preserve Ainu culture. It's somewhat of a theme park version of it, but the language is dying out. And this is just like in Wales, just like in New Zealand. These things. Hey, good night, Andrew Moboy. It wasn't until it was almost extinct that people thought, you know what, we've been devaluing this the whole time, and you know, actually this is like something that only belongs in this country and we should be treating as a national treasure. And finally this awareness is coming out kind of late, but again, by no means is Japan alone in this situation. Of course, this is being reported on SBS News. Australia's having its own struggles with this. New Zealand likes to pretend that we're really good at this sort of thing, but actually it's you know, we outlawed Maori being spoken on the phone for many years, and it actually, you know, in New Zealand it was we ourselves, and in Wales and in the UK, were primarily responsible for almost eradicating this culture. So it's pretty good that it's being acknowledged. It's fascinating, and it's part of Japan. You should go learn more about it, and it's great that they're being recognized. So yay, Ainu. Dan H. Ainu are technically the real indigenous Japanese people. Research shows that modern day Japanese people originate from other parts of Asia. That is interesting. I love these documentaries. I do love to watch these anthropology sort of things. The latest that I've been able to catch up on this, certainly modern Japanese have a mix of DNA, as you correctly point out. Philippines, China, Mongolia, you know, Korea. A lot of Japanese like to have this idea that they originated in Tibet and Mongolia, and they somehow jumped over China and Korea and they landed in Japan, and then they stole China's kanji and Korea's Buddhism. But no, obviously it's pretty clear that people have been coming into Japan steadily, just like people went to UK from Europe. You know, it's just across the border in all sorts of ways, getting blown there on fishing boats, going there on purpose. And this has been happening for, you know, since the last ice age. And there have been different waves of civilizations established in Japan which have been successful, many which starved to death and died out, and then had thousands of years later, with gaps in between, new waves of people came into Japan. The Yayoi and Jomon people that inhabited most of Japan prior to the Yamato people 2,000 years ago. The latest is like in places like Tokyo and places like Kyoto, these were constantly inhabited by people predating the modern Yamato people, and there was clear overlap. In fact, they found in Kyoto that Yayoi people were living in the same villages side by side, and they could tell the different types of pottery, the different types of houses. There was actually extensive mixing, and it seems now highly probable that the people that predated the immigration waves of the modern Japanese people, the Yayoi and Jomon people, probably intermarried a lot with modern Japanese Yamato people, and so they absorbed that as well. So certainly Japan has a very multi-ethnic background. The Ainu are a different, separate, and interesting discussion. That is another group, and there's some debate whether they are from the Jomon or Yayoi people or not, the sort of the predating Japanese people, which they find all these sort of artifacts from. but certainly Ainu people themselves actually inhabited Tokyo all the way, to Japan all the way down to Kanto. In fact, I've read accounts that suggest that even the name Mount Fuji is an Ainu name. Over time, they sort of got pushed more north and further north, and in the late 19th century, they finally holdouts were basically finally conquered and assimilated. But there is I think there's some debate as to whether the Ainu themselves were kind of from the Ainu or Jomon people, or whether the Yayoi Jomon people, or whether they were a separate group that whole time. But certainly they were, throughout Japan. And it's just it's really fascinating, and it's really great to see that NHK and other places are now also starting to endorse the fascinating, and actually really diverse anthropological history of Japan. I think someone put there in the comments as well, Japan has the Jesus burial site. Now that's a thing as well, and there are a couple of Jesuses in Japan. There's some Jesuses in Akita, and when they started getting DNA sequencing technology, they found in Akita Prefecture there are a lot of people there that have European, seemingly Russian DNA. Same thing in Kyushu. There was a person who came who had a long beard and had a strange appearance, who came through, and basically it seems highly probable that there were people, either Russians or Europeans, at some time during the closed nation period, or back in when the country was isolated, somehow got into Japan and thought that they would pretend to be Jesus, or they were probably missionaries, perhaps evangelizing. And yes, you do get. So you have these people who themselves got their own disciples and followers in Japan, and started these stories that, Jesus came to Japan and was buried here. The other thing that's really interesting is the story of the Hata clan. The Israeli ambassador to Japan actually points out that there was, among the many waves of people that came into Japan from all over Asia, there was a specific group that came allegedly all the way from the Silk Road, all the way from the Middle East, and came and eventually settled in Shikoku, and they actually have like menorah insignia on their temples. They actually, some of the, when you go to those festivals and they're carrying the omikoshi, which by the way meet almost the same specifications as the Ark from Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark that Hebrews used to carry. And when they carry it, they say Essa, which is apparently Hebrew. It doesn't mean anything in Japanese, but some of the words that they say in these festivals apparently at least sound the same as the old terms that Hebrew would use in the same situation. So yeah, there's a lot of really interesting theories that actually have even Jews convinced that there was perhaps some ancient Jewish tribes who perhaps instead of going into Europe and the Middle East and whatnot, actually left and actually went all the way to the end of the Silk Road and got to Japan and had some influence in Japan. So it's super interesting, all this sort of stuff. But among all of that, yes indeed, Indigenous Ainu. I'm going to try to zip through the rest of the stories tonight, but yes, I'm going to try to get on time, and because tonight there will be disco. That is a promise and a declaration that I'm making. That video, This Is America, by was it Childish Gambino? Apart from the fact that was like an amazing, it was a culturally impactful song and a great video. Who would have thought the director of that video was Hiro Murai, a Japanese filmmaker? That video was made by a Japanese guy. I thought that was like, whoa, that was super cool. Yeah, he got a Grammy for that. Like, it's kind of fun. Who would have thought that a Japanese person would have got the Grammy for directing the video This Is America? But he did, as well as Childish Gambino himself also got a bunch of awards for that song. And yes, and I know people are just here for the disco, but there's a lot of other interesting stuff, so bear with me, please. Fuji Rock Festival is happening this year. I have not been for more than 10 years, but the first 10 years I was in Japan, I went every year, and it was life-changing. And you should go, not just because it attracts some of the best acts. It's not just because it's one of the best music festivals and best concerts that you can go to anywhere in the world. It goes for 3 days. But just because it's just an awesome thing. You go to this ski resort in the middle of summer up in the mountains. You're camping, and it's just hundreds of thousands of people, and it's super well organized, it's safe, people are really friendly and chill, and it's just one of the best experiences you can ever have if you're into any form of music. Frankly, even if you're not into music, I can't recommend going there enough. So yeah, July 26 to 28, headlining are going to be Kendrick Lamar, NERD Nerd, Post Malone are going to apparently be on there. I keep hearing about Post Malone. I'm not keeping up very well. I don't know who Post Malone is, but I find it's interesting that, yes, get cited a lot. So there's the lineup there. Chemical Brothers, they're still going. The Cure, man, they're still going. It's kind of a wonder Man, I could talk about The Cure. They had an impact in New Zealand which wasn't always positive, but they had very, very good music, and I would go and see their stuff. SIA, Death Cab for Cutie, James Blake, Jason Mraz, Martin Garrix. You can see the list there of the headliners anyway for the concert and or for the festival. If you get the chance, seriously, it's magic. You've got to go. Lauren Sakai, literally, that is literally like Coachella with no. I've never been to Coachella, so I don't know Coachella. Maybe Coachella, from what I hear, like they've got marquees and it's actually kind of flash and nice. I also know people who go to Burning Man every year and they talk about this. It's not quite so Mad Max or anything like that. It's just literally camping up in the mountains, but no drugs is yes. It's kind of funny. I mean, the police who walk around it are super friendly. There's I've never seen a fight there. I've never seen any sort of an altercation there. Yes, it's pretty much exactly it, Lauren, and it's really, really awesome. So that is one hell of a lineup, and certainly I would encourage anybody, if you ever get the chance to go to Fuji Rock, if you come to Japan, like it's something you got to do. As I've been talking about in recent weeks as well, although Japan has had the longest sustained growth period since World War II in recent years, which you'd think would be doing well for the politicians and whatnot, people are not earning more money. And another survey, and plus we found out that the economic statistics were getting kind of screwed and twisted and so on. Not feeling the benefits of the supposed economic boom. 20% aren't sure if they feel anything or not. 66% don't feel any benefit at all at the moment, and they're still being really tight and conservative with money. Only 8% of people say that they're feeling benefits currently. So that is a thing. You remember I did a video, a standalone video, but I also talked on this show about how the idol system works in Japan, and particularly how they've kind of figured out a way to basically turn the national music selling market into the equivalent of a cabaret bar, where a cabaret bar works in Japan, where basically you pay a bunch of cash at the door in exchange for having a conversation and watered down drinks with some girls inside. Akimoto, the guy who started the AKB and all the other franchises, idol franchises like it, figured out that you could substitute cash at the door for CDs as tokens, and instead of drinking watered down drinks, you listen to watered down music. And that is the business model that's been outstandingly successful from the perspective of selling CDs. But of course, it's somewhat distorted the music market here. It means that the charts are always jam-packed with, frankly, terrible, horrible, terrible music, which is just selling amazingly. Like music industry has been struggling, with MP3s and with sort of free music sharing and YouTube and whatnot. And yet the AKB has figured out a way to counter the trend where people don't buy the CDs to listen to the CDs like they used to do. They buy the CDs in order to get the ability to handshake an idol and talk to them for 5 seconds at a meet and greet. Basically, frankly, kind of, putting them out, if you will, and using the CDs as tokens for access to them, as entry tokens on a nationwide kabakura. The result of the distorting effect that this has had is looking at the Showa Heisei best one. They call it the best 100 songs of all time based on CD sales. It means that the top songs are basically packed, or the top selling groups in terms of single sales, far and away more than twice as much as Hamasaki Ayumi is AKB48, which everybody looks at that and everybody says, well, everyone says they're basically these are just hostesses. This is people just paying for hostess tokens. That doesn't reflect that they're the best or that they're, but this is the effect that it's had. There's a ranking of songs, and you can see the top songs every year: AKB, 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 with the comment above, "This is terrible. This is hidoi. This is awful." But that's pretty much how it is. It's not really selling music anymore. They're pretty much just selling hostess tokens, and yeah, it's exactly like the hostess bar system in Japan. They've just pretty much converted the music industry into it, which is pretty much the death of it, which is a shame in a way because there's so much better music out there than what is really on the charts. But yes, that was something that happened. Taichi Sakaya, one of my favorite writers, he actually wrote a book which do I have it around here? In fact, do I have it in reach? One of my favorite books about Japan, which I read before coming here, which really helped guide my way to understanding Japanese society, was a book, literally, I think it was called This is Japan. It was a really straightforward book written by this former bureaucrat, Taichi Sakaya, who used to work for the Ministry of of Economy, Trade and Industry. And he's just a really smart guy. He's really enlightened. He very political, very clear-minded about the issues that Japan as a society has, and the sort of ways that bureaucrats and politicians should fix them, and very prescriptive. And he's actually supported a number of political movements in Japan, but basically he's a big thinker and he writes really great books, but he's also had some of his books translated and they're just really, really enlightening, and he's a great author. If you ever get a chance to read one of his books, but particularly the one which I like, which never really sold very good, I picked up in a library and I thought it was so good that I went and bought it and I read it a couple of times over. It really helped me get into news and everything in Japan. So it's a shame that he's passed away, but yeah, he's been a really great modern age thinker in Japan, and what I love about him is he's very easy to understand. He's very clear with you know, really smart people are really clear and easy to understand, and that's what this guy has. Gon replaces his lawyer. The original story for this was that he fired his lawyer in the Japanese media, and there was some debate about this on Twitter. It turns out Gon did tweet out that no, he didn't quit, he was fired. He wants to have a more vigorous or aggressive defense than his superstar defense attorney wanted to do, so he swapped him out just before his trial. So it will be interesting to see how that trial. The trial is going to be a big story, and I'll keep you up to date here. There's an NHK special which I'm not going to go into on the why Japan withdrew from the IWC, but basically it just didn't really see that it had the opportunity. It really had the ability to meaningfully stay in there. With the way that it was going, it's becoming a conservation organization. Finally, I think this is the final story for tonight. There's a couple extra ones. Japan Rail is going to launch a tourist version of Suica, which for tourists to use, basically for cashless. The only thing is that it's going to have an 1 yen limit. Normal Suica have a 20,000 yen limit. This is only going to have a 10,000 yen limit, but it's basically, it is so convenient. You can use it pretty much to buy anything and not having to carry around coins and, you know, all the cashless payments in Japan. So they're developing a kind of a way to allow tourists to travel around and possibly get discounts and benefits and so on without having to carry around cash in Japan. They're developing a tourist-oriented Suica, which I think is a really, really great idea. If you're traveling around with a backpack in Japan, always when you're standing on a train, flip it around and carry it on your front. Don't put it on the floor and don't carry it on your back, because you'll turn around, you'll hit people, and this is currently now, according to surveys, the biggest nuisance that people most hate on Japanese subways. So don't do that. Remember to carry it on your front, and that is it. That is all the topics. Oh yeah, there's one thing I put at the end here, which is man, the chairman of the Korean Parliament came up with a great idea, saying that yeah, we know that you set up the Comfort Women Fund, and we changed our minds about that, and we know about the World War II compensation that you know, we don't think really should be treated as having happened. But yeah, if Japan wants to set things right with Korea, all that they need to do is just have the emperor personally apologize, personally to holding their hands and lowering his head to all of the Comfort Women, and that'll be the end of the whole thing. And apart from the fact that this outraged a lot of conservatives in Japan, that they were dragging that Korea was casually dragging the emperor into it. The other thing which really wound up Japanese people is that you know, frankly, nobody takes that statement as being in good faith, even if it happened, and not that it ever would happen, but even if it did happen, no one believes that Korea would accept that that issue is ever going to be resolved. And you know, and they took that statement as being insincere, and the Abe has come and demanded once again that South Korea apologize and retract the statement, which of course they said that they're not going to do. It's like with the radar missile lock thing. I mean, even if you're right, I mean, seriously, what do you think you're going to get out of demanding an apology? They're never going to apologize to Japan for anything, even no matter how wrong they are. And at the same time, we have an $89,000 verdict on the wartime labor, which is the Korean courts are slowly moving towards now confiscating assets of Japanese companies in Korea in order to be able to pay the labor wages for that which the South Korean government, according to Japan, under the treaty resolving and settling outstanding war-related claims, Japan believes that the South Korean government has to resolve this and not allow Japanese companies to be liable for war-related claims civilly. The South Korean government isn't doing anything about it and doesn't show any motivation to do that. The Japanese government is trying to set up a dispute mechanism under the Diplomatic Relations Treaty, saying that this violates that. And right now South Korea's government's having corruption scandals. They're going down the tube, so the last thing they're going to want to do is be seen to be doing anything to help out Japan, which means that this is all heading for a very, very bad place with South Korea, and there isn't really a clear way to stop it, and Japan's just going to keep basically saying that, yeah, Korea needs to apologize. Korea's never going to do anything about that because they feel entitled as victims to not ever have to do that, and that's where that's going to go, and it's not going to get any better, and it's a shame. let's do some music. We are exactly on time. I tried to end a little bit before the show, but let's get in and let's do some disco. I haven't done some disco for a while. Now, one thing is, I'm not sure that I can. So frustrating that I can't get the screen capture working on this. Let's. Sorry, that would have just made a big noise just now. Let me plug that in again. Well, I'll tell you what, even if I can't share the screen, which maybe I can't, I can at least plug in and play some tunes. So let's do some disco. Give me some ideas of what you want to listen to. What kind of a disco sound? Give me some inspirational thoughts, and let's do a disco track to go out. Let's cut a new track. And let's get a disco beat. Let me check that you can hear it. Which maybe you can't. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. We have lights, we have sound, we have action. So here we go. Let's make it a slow disco. So let's go for like a 124. Let's get a regular standardized disco beat. Not do anything too clever, keep it simple. Let's do a disco 2. Now, what sort of a track should we do? Let's make it D sharp. Start with the bass. Start 32. It's kind of cool. Some bass. Okay, it's gonna make it disco-y. We need some orchestra. Okay. Let's add the hi-hats. It's kind of cool. That works. That's the show. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll try to make some more tracks and upload them soon, but that came out quite well. That's quite good for doing on the fly. Just made that. I'm going to save that. Save. And remember to like if you like. Hang out, there'll be the short videos of this during the week. Remember to check out on Wednesday, Japan Business Time. And as always, have a very, very good week. Look out for more My Chan TV updates coming out soon. And booyah, peace. Have a good one. See ya.